Hello, this is Dr. Josiah Boornazian here at UTRGV. I'm the Assistant Professor of Jazz and Applied Saxophone. In this video, I just want to give you guys some quick and easy and practical ideas on how to practice for the TMEA State Jazz Improv etudes for the improvisation component. So, obviously, learning how to improvise is a lifelong pursuit, and there's nothing that anybody can do overnight to really make themselves better. But there are a few techniques and strategies we can talk about to approach these particular etudes that can help you improvise with a little bit more maturity and authenticity and spontaneity. So, of course, rule number one is you should never just memorize licks and regurgitate them, because that's not improvising. So then the question is, well, what do I play? What notes do I play when I'm improvising? So the language of jazz is, again, something that takes a lifetime, if not more, to really master and absorb. So step number one, is to listen. You've got to listen to a lot of jazz recordings by iconic jazz performers. So obviously for saxophone, we should all know who those names are. People like Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, Sonny Stitt, Cannonball Adderley, so on and so forth. So this first etude here happens to be based on the chord changes of Autumn Leaves. So on the topic of listening, if you want some good recordings of Autumn Leaves, the Cannonball Adderley recording from Something Else, record called Something Else, is classic, and there's several Miles Davis recordings as well as Bill Evans recordings that are worth listening to. So you want to listen to those recordings with as much focus and attention as you can. Really try and absorb as much as you can from the music, not just the note choices, but also things like how their time feel what's their approach to time feel, how do their eighth notes feel, when do they choose to play eighth notes versus eighth note triplets, where do they tend to start their lines, do they start their ideas on upbeats or downbeats, and you can pay attention to, especially with the saxophone players, things like their tone quality, their articulation, their dynamics, which notes they accent, which ones they don't, and all of those things. You want to try and get those sounds in your ear so that when you're improvising, in the back of your mind, you have the emotional feeling of great jazz performances in your memory to inspire your melodic and rhythmic ideas. So, that being said, how are we going to approach Autumn Leaves here? So the first step is to probably figure out what the key centers are. And if you need to, let's try and reduce the etude into some bigger chunks, right? So one of the mistakes that people make is sometimes people fall into the trap of thinking chord to chord to chord, right? So they're only thinking about one chord change at a time, and they're trying to figure out, well, what scale do I play for this chord? So, and that's a problem for two reasons. First of all, chords don't exist in a vacuum, right? Chords are always related to other chords. So the chord you're playing on right now, there's probably several scale choices that you can use that will sound good. And the scale that you ultimately end up settling on to choose notes from to come up with a melody is going to be influenced by the chords that come before and after. And then the other reason that just focusing on the music one chord at a time is a problem is that you're missing the perspective of thinking about the vocabulary of jazz harmony in bigger chunks. Oftentimes, a chord is not happening randomly. Chord is happening because it's leading into another chord, which is leading into another chord. So it's similar to this first issue, but I'm going to expand that and say that you can start to think about your harmonic phrases in bigger chunks and try and figure out what's the main goal or purpose harmonically of that phrase? And if possible, when it's possible, can we reduce that phrase? So first, let's just think about what our key centers are and what scale choices we have. And then we'll talk about voice leading in a little bit. So on the simplest level, Autumn Leaves for alto, I'm looking at the E flat changes because I'm playing alto today. It's in the key of essentially G major or E minor. Most people would say it's an E minor because it ends in the key of E minor. So you could get away with this tune probably just kind of playing around in the key of G major and E minor, but we're going to sharpen that up and refine that in a second. It doesn't work with all tunes because very often jazz tunes modulate to different key centers, or at the very least they borrow chords from various key centers, so you can't just play in one key the whole time. But this tune is relatively simple in its harmony. It's probably why it was selected. It's really only got two key centers, G major and E minor, and as most of you probably know, those key centers are related. They have the same key signature, right? E minor is the relative minor of G major, and vice versa, right? G major is the relative major of E minor. But that being said, when we play jazz, we don't actually use the same scale for these two key centers most of the time. Okay, so if we are going to try and break this down into two scales, or two key centers, let's figure out different scales for the two key centers. So the easiest way to get started is let's look for 5-1 progressions. Okay, so a 5-1 progression is where there's a dominant chord, and then that dominant chord goes up a fourth or down a fifth to the next chord, right? So it's creating a 5-to-1 chord progression of a dominant going to anything. It could be another dominant, but most likely it's a major or minor chord. So 5-1s are your 5-1 chord progressions are your hint that you're in a certain key. Okay, so in this etude we have, for example, in bar 2 of where the form actually starts. So it's bar 6 of the etude sheet, but it's bar 2. There's a 4-bar intro that's not part of the form. So bar 2, we've got a D7 chord that resolves to G major 7. Okay, that's a classic 5-1 progression. That tells us that for that moment, at least, we're in the key of G major. And then if you back up further, there's an A minor chord, which happens to be the diatonic 2 chord in the key of G major. And then after the G major chord, there's a C major chord, which happens to be the 4 chord. So we can, if we wanted to, sit down and look at this first 4-bar phrase of the form, one chord at a time, and figure out, well, what are my scale choices for this? And you could have a few for each one of these. Or we could just step back and look at it from a broader perspective and say, hey, the first 4 bars are just in the key of G major. It's a 2, 5, 1, 4, right? 2 minor 7 chord, 5 dominant chord, 1 major 7, 4 major 7. So we can just play the G major scale, our G major scale, for those first 4 bars, okay? Now if we look at the second 4 bars, the F sharp minor 7 flat 5, which is the same as an F sharp half diminished, that chord could also be in the key of G major, right? Because that's the diatonic 7 chord, right? So the diatonic 7 chord in the key of G major is F sharp minor 7 flat 5, or F sharp half diminished. But then we get this B7 flat 9, okay? So B7, the third note of a B7 chord, is a D sharp. So we're definitely not in the key of G major anymore, right? Because there's no D sharps in the key of G major. So I've got a dominant chord, B7. Does it go up, does the root movement go up a fourth or down a fifth? Sure enough, it does. It goes from B7 to E minor 7. So there's another 5-1. So putting those clues together, the fact that we've got a 5-1 progression and then there's a D sharp, I'm going to need to change my scale choices here. So the simplest scale choice that I can play over the second 4-bar phrase is E harmonic minor. So E harmonic minor is the minor scale, right, that has a flat third or a lower third, a flat 6 or a lowered 6th, and a natural 7, okay? So that scale is going to work very well over the 4 bars in E minor. You'll get the the F sharp, the A, the C natural, and the E for the F sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord. All of those notes are in the key of E harmonic minor, or in that scale. For the next chord, B7 flat 9, right? That would be spelled B, D sharp, F sharp, A. Okay, that's the basic dominant 7th chord. All of those notes are in E harmonic minor scale, and we have the flat 9, which is a C natural. That's also in the E harmonic minor scale. And then E minor 7, even though it technically says E minor 7, which strictly means you have a G natural and a D natural, right? Because a minor 7 chord means flat 3rd or a minor 3rd, and a flat 7 or a minor 7th. Even though that's what it says on paper, because it's functioning as the tonic chord temporarily, it's functioning as the 1 chord, the harmonic minor scale will still work. It will sound good, because the harmonic minor scale is what we call a tonic minor scale, because it's got that major 7th, that D sharp, the leading tone. It's going to sound good there. Okay? So if we follow that logic for the rest of the tune, well, the next 4-bar phrase after the repeat is the same as the previous 4-bar phrase, right? So we have another 2-5-1, a minor 2-5-1 in the key of E minor. So for all 4 of those bars, F sharp minor 7 flat 5, B7 flat 9, E minor 7. We can also play E harmonic minor. And then we go back to the opening phrase, which is the 2-5-1-4 in the key of G major, so that's 4 bars of G major. Right? And then we have another minor 2-5 in the key of E minor. And then it's not until we get to this D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7. That's the first time we've modulated out of the key of G major or E minor. So that's the key of the 4, right? If you think that this tune is in G major, we're going to the key of the 4. Or if you think of this as being in the key of E minor, we're going to the key of the flat 6. So we're going to C major. So for those 2 bars, the D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7, we're basically going to switch to our C major scale. And then we're back to E harmonic minor for the minor 2-5 and E minor again. Okay? So we should all know our G major scale, right? Right? And then E harmonic minor, again, it's the scale with a flat 3 and a flat 6 but a natural 7. Right? And then we should all know C major as well. So really you can get away with playing this whole tune with just those 3 scales. Okay? The next level of advanced playing would be to not only think about what the correct scales are, but to think about what are the strongest notes for a given chord. And obviously the stronger notes are the chord tones, and specifically the strongest notes are going to be the 3rds and the 7ths, right? Because the roots and the 5ths, although those are important notes, roots and 5ths don't change from one chord to a next if you have the same root but a different chord quality. So if you just think about what I'm saying for a second, if you think about C major 7, right, that's spelled C-E-G-B. Okay, and if you think about C dominant 7, that's spelled C-E-G-B flat. And if you think about C minor 7, that's C-E flat, G-B flat. So for all 3 of those chords, the root and the 5th are the same, C and G. So what makes those chords different? It's the combination of 3rds and 7ths. So 3rds and 7ths are the most important notes in jazz. Okay, so I'm going to pull up an Autumn Leaves backing track, play along, in the key of G minor. I'm just going to pull one up from YouTube, and I'm going to demonstrate what I mean with these scale choices. Okay, so I'm not even going to think too much about voice leading at this point, although my ears will probably naturally bring me toward playing more chord tones, and especially 3rds and 7ths. But I'm really just going to focus on catching the key change shifts from G major to E harmonic minor, and like I said, try and hit some chord tones. Okay, so here's some Autumn Leaves.
I just love hitting the open road and telling people that Liberty Mutual customized.
Let's go ahead and skip the advertisement here. So here we go.